Hello, everybody. The Podkvlt is live on a Saturday night. What's going on, everybody? We have had a interesting day today. The two of us. We figured out some stuff, so we have some good news coming your way. We'll start the show with Kelly. Why don't you tell us about where you were at last night?
Oh yeah, last night
Yeah.
I was at a show here in Chicago at Reggie's. It was I'm originally from Sweden, so this is a Swedish band, death metal band or death grind, D beat
Sure.
core. Well,
Yeah.
Vomitory, fantastic band, and they were playing with Gorgasm, Lividity, and Melting Rot as well. It was a really super awesome show. Hooked up with some friends there, really good bands, really good time, and I got the T-shirt to prove it too. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was really awesome. Um, I was a little bit surprised to see that Vomitory only were playing 3 dates in the U.S. and that it was their first time here. They've been around since '89, but it was really really good. I managed to say hello to the drummer, who is a friend of a friend, and met a lot of friends there. If I Were the Devil, a band I know, they were basically there, the whole band. Um, Talked a bit with the Lividity drummer before the show too, and they kicked absolute ass. It was a really really good time.
That's awesome. So let's start out with what would you say is the best live show you've ever seen? Can you like narrow it down to like maybe one or two? Like give us your top two favorite live shows.
Yeah. Unfortunately I have to go way back on that one. I thought about that a while back. Um, and what's funny is that those two were only a week apart, and it was back when I lived in Sweden, and it was in 1989. The one that I would have to rank highest was a triple bill. It was Acid Rain, Nuclear Assault, and Dark Angel. I think it was the first time that Gene Hoglan was playing with Dark Angel too. So this is '89.
Mm-hmm.
It was the Leave Scars album, and it was in an old slaughterhouse in Stockholm, Sweden. Um, it was packed. It was all like young folks like me, and we were all really enthusiastic. It was super positive, right? And there's the atmosphere was so fucking awesome. The bands were so good, so
Yeah.
freaking good. I mean, anything with Gene Hoglan is obviously fantastic, right?
Yeah.
But he was not much of a celebrity then, right? But yeah, no, it was, people were so excited that the bands had to sort of like tell the audience to slow down a little bit. Like, there were too many people getting up on stage diving off or whatever, that they couldn't play. People were so excited. So that's my number one. I have a number two as well, and that's just because of um, the one band was so awesome. It was I went there to see Sodom. They were a favorite of mine back then,
Mm-hmm.
in '89. But um, opening for them was Sepultura. So this was the album before Arise. The name of the album escapes me now, but they were so damn good. Like, of any single set I've ever seen, that set by Sepultura is number one. Um, Fun thing was that Merciless, that is kind of legendary now. They were a little teeny tiny little local band that opened up. So that's something I can brag to the black metal folks about. I saw Merciless
Sure.
when they were about to release their first album. you know, um, but yeah, so those two are at the top for me. But I mean, I've probably seen better shows since then, but it's kind of the nostalgia of it. It was still
Sure.
new to me at the time, right? So it's still some novelty there, and that newness of the experience that happened with those. How about you?
So my all-time favorite show was it actually was part of Sepultura, but it was Soulfly opening for Pantera.
Mm.
That was probably like hands down the best show that I had seen. I saw Pantera first time in '99, and they were just incredible. And they opened up that show with Morbid Angel was the opening act, and then there was a band called a Nothing Face, which was like the
Mm.
opener, and then there was this band called Scrape, and they were like a kind of fusion band of like some of the I don't know what genre you would call them, but they kind of had that like Wednesday 13 sound where it was like kind of horror shock rock, but it was like there was a few guys from like these different like um band, like one of the guys in the band was from Death Star, who they were like an industrial punk metal band. So Scrape was kind of like the opener, and then it went from there. And then when Pantera came around the second time, it was 2000, I think, or 2001. They had just released Reinventing the Steel, and that's kind of, they changed their whole dynamic of their stage set, where they actually had just amps to, I think they were like 14 or 15 feet tall and probably about 75 feet wide on the stage. And they had these like fire bursts on top of them. So every time Vinny would hit the blast beats, the fire would like, so it was just incredibly like you're in an arena and like you feel the heat. Like these things must have been 1,000 degrees. And that was, so just the tightness of Pantera. I've
Yeah.
seen probably 300 plus shows in my life. And I don't think there's been a band that's been as tight as Pantera. Like they were on point the entire time. Phil didn't miss a beat. Dime's solos are even better live than you ever see them on a video. And Vinny's just an incredible drummer, probably one of the most underrated in the metal business, right? Like, just tight. Like Rex's bass was on, like everything was on point with them. There was never a band that I've seen that was like as powerful live as Pantera.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I hear that they were really awesome last week here in
Yeah,
town too. So they're one of the bands that still have it, right?
right.
So
So, and now and I love Zach Wild's take on Pantera, right? Like they're not Pantera. They're doing this in remembrance of Diamond Vinny. They're not like doing it to like, it's not a cash grab. It's not of like, they're celebrating them, and Dime, and Vinny obviously had both passed on, but like to pay tribute to them is kind of cool. Like that's Zach's take on it. He's like, I'm not the Pantera guitarist. I'm not Dimebag. I'm doing the best I can to fill his shoes, right? So it's kind of a unique take on it, as looking at it, and they're like, well, how do you call that Pantera? It's not Pantera without Vinny, and Dime, and it's like they're not trying to be Pantera; they're just using the name, right? But they all say, Charlie Benante has Vinny's face on the drum kit, right? Like it's celebrating them. Zach wears Dime's vest, right? So it's
yeah,
got a big picture of Dime with the angel wings on it. So it's cool. It's the nostalgic of it. And then a very, very special concert for me was my buddy Kyle was turning 21, and we took him to see Rob Zombie. And we were front row. We got to the Rave Theater. It was probably, I think it was a 7:30 show. We were there at like 5 when the doors opened. We were the first ones in. I actually caught 2 of Riggs's picks when he threw them in. Like I just kind of happened to like grab them. We were front and center for that. That was right around the time when he released Hellbilly Deluxe. So it was like Dragula and like all the other songs. So that was, and he played a plethora of White Zombie songs too. So that was just special because my buddy Kyle was turning 21. We was the first time we get drinks and stuff at and actually party at a show. And then another one near and dear to my heart, and I always say this, was the first time I saw Mushroomhead, because I didn't even know who they were. My buddy Chris, his friend, I think I mentioned this last week, but his friend was in a band called 5.0, and they were a 5-piece from Joliet, and they only put out one album. They basically got rock and roll stardom went to their heads. They all thought that they were the most important people of the band, and they all ended up breaking off, and none of them had done music after that album. But they opened for Mushroomhead, and he's like, hey, do you want to go with me? I was like, I don't know who your friends are in their band. He's like, oh, well, they're like hard rock, heavy metal. I'm like, well, that's right up my alley. And back then you didn't have, like, you couldn't grab your phone and be like, oh, well, listen, right? You had to either have the CD or like the very beginning of YouTube, right? You can go to YouTube and kind of see these kind of like, little clips of like these bands. So 5.0 was awesome. They opened for Mushroomhead, and Mushroomhead just kind of took me back. I was a fan ever since that day. I think that was 99 or 2000. It was one of the eras. And going to school in Wisconsin, we had access to the rave, which was awesome because it was right, it was in Milwaukee. It was about 45 minutes away from my college. And so we got to see a lot of shows there, but Mushroomhead just kind of was like they blew me away. They were awesome. They were tight. And, you know, they got the rip off of, you know, stealing from Slipknot. But like, actually, if you do the homework, they were before Slipknot. So as far as
Oh, there you
having
go.
8 or 9 guys in the band playing drums and synthesizers and keyboards and all the other stuff. So that was just really special to me because I you know, my buddy Chris introduced me after the show. He's like, this is my friend. And he was actually the girl in the band was the guitarist, and she was awesome. She was a great guitarist. And that's who my buddy Chris, they went to Joliet Catholic together. So he introduced us to them. She was actually, I think, dating the singer at the time. So they were hanging out. So we got to meet them. They were all in our age group. Like they were all our same age, 20 years old at that time. Right. So it was kind of cool to see a band that like you could like hang out with that were like weren't grown men at that point. They were kids. They were just like us. They were just, you know, so that was cool. So those 3 shows are always special, but I don't think another band, and I've seen the best that like I've seen Kiss, I've seen Iron Maiden, I've seen Motorhead, I've seen all these other great bands. None of them compared to Pantera live. That they were something else. It was just incredible to see.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, if I think back of the non-early shows, sort of after I got back into the scene after a 20+ year absence, when I went to Gary, Indiana, and saw Meshuggah with In Flames, Whitechapel. I forget one more, but that
Okay.
was a great bill
Sure.
too.
Yeah.
You know, but these are, you know, I that's also when I realized that holy crap, most of the bands are still like the old guys that are still around or have reformed or whatever, right?
Yeah.
You know, Whitechapel, I don't know how old they are or whatever, but it's still like, you know, it's cool to see that the old guys are still doing well. But you know, I think
Yeah.
they need to be more of the younger generation to pick up the baton here. So sometimes, so
Yeah, I agree. So like
I'm
Whitechapel, they were young when they started, right? Like they were kids. They were 17, 18 years old.
yeah,
So, you know, when they were growing up, like you got to see them, like I said, they were kind of like 5.0 for me. They were our age. Like you could resonate with them. You know, they weren't the older guys at the time, right? So like, you know, the first time I saw Iron Maiden, I think it was 20, maybe 2005, 2006, and Motorhead opened up for them. And at that time, they were in their probably mid to late 50s, right? Motorhead was, I think Lemmy was almost 60 at that time, right?
yeah,
And I'm 23 years old, right? So I'm like, this is, you know, awesome. But at that point, they were already up in age. Like Iron Maiden had been touring for 35 years at that point, right? So they were, you
yeah.
know, and same with Motorhead. So you know, it was just nice. It was refreshing to see like a younger act that were kind of like, and I remember when Whitechapel came out, they were you know my age at that time. They were 19, 20 years old.
Yeah, they're still your age, by the way.
Yeah, probably now, right?
I'm sure they aged with you.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, but yeah, no, that I, I that's when it's exciting to go to the smaller shows too, right? That's usually where
I
you see
love the smaller. Yeah,
the kids, you know, like the newer bands are trying to catch up or make it, right? You know, they're trying really hard, right? You know, like it's a completely different energy. So there are times when I can go to a show because my friend's band is playing or whatever, and then I'm blown away by some band that I forget their name the day
yeah,
after sometimes, right? Right. But I remember that they blew my mind away. And then, you know, when I see their name on a poster next time, I'll remember it. You know, oh, that's what they were called.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, obviously you can go back online and check it out or whatever. But I think that's what's really exciting about going to the smaller shows, and that's also when you can sort of smell the sweat and all that
sure.
stuff, right?
So I
I
have a
haven't been.
very unique experience about a small show. I'll tell you when you're done with this. It just
Yeah,
came to
no,
me.
yeah, go ahead.
So it's probably 20, let's say 2003, maybe 2003, 2004. And the band Alabama Thunder Pussy was playing in the Elbow Room. And they'd been a pretty established big rock band at this time, right? Like they had a couple of big songs that were getting radio play on MTV, on Hairbangers Ball. They had a lot of recognition in the South. they would play with a lot of like those, like I think they were playing at that time with Mastodon, and they were kind of had like that stoner hardcore, like, you know, scene. I think they went on tour with Superjoint Ritual at some point. So I was like, oh, they're a pretty big band. I'm gonna go and see them, right? So I buy a ticket. It was like maybe $16 or $15 at the Elbow Room, and you know, the Elbow Room is on North in Milwaukee. It's just south of Milwaukee to the right, and you would walk by this place and not even know that it was there. There's a little sign up on the top that says the Elbow Room, and you walk in a door and you walk down a hallway that's about 15 feet long, and it just opens up into a room. And there's a stage. It's probably about maybe 3 feet high at tops, and the band's on that, so you're pretty much eye level with the band. And so I walk in and they're playing, right? It's probably 8:30, quarter to 9 at night, and they had just started their set. I think I was one of 10 people in the place. There was nobody there. And they were like a pretty, at that time, they were a pretty big like band. Now I'm thinking, like, am I in the right place? Like, this is them. And there was nobody in there. So the entire time it was me and like, I want to say like maybe 6 or 7 other people. There was a couple older people at the bar just having a drink. And there was like a couple like people that were just kind of in the back that were just there. But you could tell they're there every night, right? That's their local bar. They didn't care about the band. They didn't care about anything. So I'm sitting there front row, like standing there watching this awesome band play. And when they're done, like they got off the stage, they shook my hand. They're like, let's go grab a drink. Went to the bar, had a drink with them, like hanging out with them. And their, you know, roadies are there. Like they had 2 or 3 like stage people packing up all their gear. So they're just kind of hanging out. But it was the most bizarre experience I ever had, because, you know, usually in a place like that, there's probably 150, 200 people. There was literally like 10 people in this place. I was like, I had the whole night for the rest of the band. I ended up buying a T-shirt from them. They signed it. And I think their logo on their thing was, it said Alabama Thunder Pussy, and then it said Whiskey Bent Southbound was their slogan at the time. And they just came out with that song 3 Stars, which is actually a really good song. That was kind of like their like popular like hit, I guess you could say. But that was such a unique, bizarre experience, because normally when you go to a place, there's probably, you know, like I said, about 150, 200 people. It's not a very big place. Like the Elbow Room max capacity is probably 200. But you'd figure there would be I was like one of, like I said, probably 5 or 6 people there to see the band. So it was very weird. That was a cool experience, because I got to hang out with them and, you know, got to like, you know, shoot the shit with them for a few minutes. And, you know, they were, you know, having a drink, they were hanging out for a little bit. And it was just kind of unique that it was like, you know, you felt like at the time, I didn't realize, but like, you feel bad, right? Because you're like, they're a big band. And there was like, they probably made $30 that night by the time everything was all said and done. Right.
Yeah, no, that's another benefit of the small shows, and also the bands that really also sometimes probably just on a whim, like, let's go play a small place, you know, like this, you know, like we used to, in a sense. So, but what was the first show like? And we can keep it to the metal thing, or any concert for that matter. Like, what was your first, and thinking that I want to go to more of these guys?
So the first show that I ever saw was with my buddy Jim. We went to see Jackal. And we saw them at a bar called Penny Road Pub in Barrington. I don't even know if it's still there, but they actually, their stage was they would move the pool tables together and put plywood on it and drape like a curtain over it. So that was their stage. And I remember we saw Jackal there. We weren't old enough to drink. We were still in high school. We were seniors. So that would have been 98. So I would have been 18 years old, 17, 18 years old. So it was an all ages show. And that was my first rock concert that I had seen. And so they were awesome. And I'm still a Jackal fan. I actually just went to see them last year, and I took a picture with Jesse, and like, you know, he's like, and that's a unique story with Jackal, because like after going to the show year after year after year after year for years and years and years, every time I see Jesse, he's like, hey, what's up? He gives me a hug. And back in the day, he used to do like he used to put his hands around your throat, like he was, and that's how they would take the pictures. And so I showed him a picture that I took on a Razor phone. Now I'm dating myself very, very badly here, but I took a picture with him choking me with a Razor phone. And I was like, you remember this? He's like, that had to have been 20 years ago. I'm like, yeah, right. And so we just kind of chuckled at it. So Jackal was my first show. and that was kind of my introduction into like the rock scene as far as like, but I had in high school, I was always a fan of like heavy music. Like in the locker room for football, everybody was blasting Pantera, Megadeth, Metallica, so getting practice, going to practice, coming out of practice, it was always metal in the locker room. There was nothing else. There was never any rap, never ever country, nothing like that. It was always hard rock and heavy metal. So it was, those were the bands that like every day coming back from practice, they'd pop in Pantera and it'd be, Vulgar Display of Power or Far Beyond Driven,
Mhm.
Megadeth and Anthrax and like all these other, and back then that was kind of even the precursor to CDs. Most of that was still on tape. There was a radio with a cassette and you'd pop it in and that's what they were listening to. So getting
Right.
like in and around that, I've always been a fan of like hard rock and heavy metal. I just had never really went to a show before that. And Jackal was kind of my first one, my buddy Jim and we've had a long experience with Jackal. We go and see them all the time. But they were kind of my intro. That was my first. And another unique concert experience I had, which I liked it a lot more than I thought I would, was the Black Crowes.
Mm.
They were
Yeah.
very, very, very good live. Psychedelic, kind of a unique crowd, but all their songs rock. They were very, very good live.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I've seen them live on TV a few times. I had a buddy
Yeah.
that was a huge Black Rose fan. So,
And so
yeah.
I'll segue into another quick story. I'm going on tangents here, but Jackal had a band opening for them called Blackberry Smoke. And now they're known as like a country band. Their last couple albums have been more country. They've gotten a lot of radio playing like country music stations, stuff like that. They opened for Jackal, and at that time they were a rock band. And their slogan when we bought their shirts, I actually still have it. It said it had a trucker girl on the front with her boobs out, and it said Blackberry Smoke, and underneath it was titties and beer was their slogan. And the trucker girl had two like Pabst cans, and that was their thing, right? So we saw them in Chicago and we liked them. We went to Cincinnati, Ohio to see them. They invited us to the show. They're like, come down and see us, next week. We'll be in Cincinnati. So me and my buddy Jim took a road trip to Cincinnati to see them, right? So the entire time the band is hanging out with us, we're talking shop, we're, talking about tour, being a new rock band, Jackal, the whole experience, and so they blew up, right? So Blackberry Smoke now is way more popular than Jackal would ever have been, right? And so we go to see them on Joe's on Wheat Street, right? Now, Joe's on Wheat Street is a country bar. I know you're not super familiar with the Chicagoland area, but like
Yeah, I know.
Joe's is a country bar. Like they have a lot of country and Western acts that go there and play, right? So Blackberry Smoke is going and playing there, right? So me and my buddy Jim, we decided to go and see them, right? Like we saw them when they were nobodies opening for Jackal, and we're like, okay, let's go give them their fair share. Like, let's go and see them, right? So we're going, and now they are totally country. They had the #1 song on 99.5 Country's Rock. Their entire catalog now was shifted over to the country side of music. So of course that comes with cleaning up their act. No more titties and beer, no more smoke one, got one hot damn type of thing, right? They're super family friendly, right? So we're there. So
Yeah.
we're young kids, right? We're drinking some beers and we're getting a little fun with the audience and stuff like that. And it is all people that know them as the country Blackberry Smoke. We know them as the hard rock Blackberry Smoke. So there's a
Right.
down set in like the middle of the thing. They're kind of doing this like acoustic, like kind of like I think it might have been like a Leonard Skinner tune that they were covering, and it's kind of low, and they're kind of drowning it out. My buddy goes, so the singer Charlie Starr, Paul's their guitarist, Brett, who passed away, was their drummer, and they kind of like they knew us from Cincinnati, right? So my buddy Jim is now completely wrecked. He's completely hammered. It just happens to be the quiet time, and there's all these like country fans there, guys with cowboy hats on, and he yells out titties and beer. And so everyone kind of just looks, and I was like all eyes on him. They're like, everyone stared at him, and we're like, and so the band isn't like, they know what we're talking about, right? Like they know
Right.
we're fans of that, and everyone else is around us is like, what is titties and beer? Like, but we don't understand the reference. So after the set, he's all hammered, and we go up to the band and we're like, great set, we miss you guys, we love what you guys do with Jackal, and they appreciated that. And so we're like, what happened to the titties and beer and the drink one, smoke one, hot damn? And they're like, we had to clean that up. Like we're like family friendly, radio friendly band now, right? And we're like, we understood, right? They're multi-millionaires now. They got platinum selling albums and stuff like that. But we remember them when they were a local opening band for Jackal. Jackal took them on tour and kind of blew up. And so that was the kind of, the titties and beer thing was awesome because my buddy Jim yells it out and everybody in the place was like, titties, and what the hell are they talking about? So that was fun. So that's another good rock story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not similar really. But it's one of those, bands that change. Like, I don't know, if you know that Goo Goo Dolls used to be a punk band, and I was a huge punk guy. And then they softened up and sounded more like the Replacements, and then they turned into what they are today, right?
Yeah.
But I went to see them in Sweden. They were touring for the album that had the song Iris on it, but it hadn't really blown up yet. So there's 60 people there. So yeah, I get to hang out with the band and have a few beers or whatever and chat along. And it was then surreal afterwards to see how big they got.
Yeah.
But it was also from cleaning themselves up, right? Unfortunately, sure. The bass player that liked to write punk rock song and wasn't the handsome one. That he's sort of blacked out in all the videos now or whatever. Yeah, like right. You stand in the back and you don't sing anymore. So that's. I mean, obviously they do quality music. It's not my thing so much anymore though. But
sure,
but that was fun.
And you got to understand, right? Like when you get a record deal and they're paying for you to be the face of their company, and you're selling millions of records, and you're making. Like you have to clean up your act, right? They tell you, like, unless you're like known for being vulgar and like being a band that like got their brand recognition on being, punk rock or being like shock rock or being like in that genre. For the most part, the record companies are like, listen, guys, you had your fun. We have to write radio friendly songs that are going to sell because that's what's going to make us money. That's the fan base you're going to go after is, these younger kids that are, not. So they understand, right? Like they're like, okay, well, we'll leave that punk metal kind of scene behind and we'll move into the radio friendly stuff because that's what's going to sell and that's what's going to make us money. Now of course there's a bunch of bands that have never sold out that have said they could have done that and they opted not to, which is respectable, but money when it puts food on your family's table matters, you know. And so
we talked a bit about that last week too, that there's so many. I would say most of the extreme metal bands, they keep doing what they're doing, and they'll keep touring in their vans, and they still put on a great show, and they know that, well, the biggest venue we're going to play at is like a Reggie's, like 500 people type of thing. That's the biggest we're going to get. But that doesn't mean that, maybe we should try to sound like In Flames or one of those sort of mega bands or whatever, right? Nothing's ever going to be as big as Pantera and Metallica were in metal, but I think that's also one of those cool things about going to a live metal show is that there's always that fucking intensity, right?
Sure.
That's I had at Vomitory I had a brief chat with the drummer who is first of all probably one of the tallest men on the planet. He's also like one of the best drummers on the planet. But he was dead. They had played festivals in Europe last week, had to fly over here. They played Baltimore the night before, flew over here, didn't sleep. He hadn't had anything to eat. Everything was like, he said he was so dead. And then when you see the way that he plays the drums, it's like, that's how he plays when he feels like he's, close to being hospitalized. It's like no matter what, this is what we do, right? And I think that's I have been to very few. I actually right now I can't think of one off the top of my head where I felt like a band was just mailing it in. I feel like pretty much every underground metal type show I've been to, the bands have played their fucking hearts out. So I hardly ever get disappointed when I go to a
Yeah.
metal show.
So one of the most unique things I've ever seen, I was with my cousin Chris, and we attest to this story all the time. We were at the Milwaukee Metal Fest, and this was probably like 2005. It was the show I was talking about. What Arch Enemy was there, Suspiria was there, Darkane was there. There were like Immortal was there, and I can't think of there was probably like a 7 or 8 big name bands, right? And then you get a lot of the indie bands, and you get a lot of, smaller acts as well that are trying to make it and get notarized. And, they're out there signing CDs and signing shirts and signing, merchandise and stuff like that. And we happened to come across this band called Divine Rapture. And they were they were fans of Morbid Angel. That was kind of their sound that they were going after. They were trying to emulate Morbid Angel. Very tight, solid band. So they get up on stage, and they're doing their tech stuff and their sound checks, and they're looking around, and their drummer did not show up. And so they're looking at each other, and they're like, they were going to cancel the set. And somebody in the crowd goes, just play without a drummer. And they did. They played the entire set with no drums. It was bass, the singer, and the guitarist. It was awesome. It was like the coolest thing to see, because how incredibly good they sounded without a drummer. So that they were going to be tight. And it's funny because after the show, I had talked to their bassist and backing vocal. His name's Bob Devotian. Bobek is his real name, and we still are in touch till this day. And I always bring up, like, that was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen, that you guys just didn't throw in the towel and leave, that you played 13 songs without a drummer. Like, it was one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen. And they just did it for the fans, because the fans were like so excited to see them, and they were being billed as the next Morbid Angel. Like, that's what their like sound was. They had so we bought their CD, we had them sign it, we were taking pictures with the band, we were doing and they were incredible. And then come to find out that the singer of the band was always part of Divine Rapture, but he went to sing for a really famous Monstrosity. He sang for Monstrosity for like 5 years. So he never gave up Divine Rapture. But Bob texted me one day and goes, hey, just so you know, Mike it was JJ Huberfeck was the guitarist, and Mike Huberfeck was the singer, and then Bob was the bassist. And he's like, hey, just so you know, Mike and JJ are playing with Monstrosity now, and Mike's going to be their permanent new singer. So I went and checked all the Monstrosity stuff. It was awesome, right? Because they filled in. And then JJ was just sessioning in the band. Their guitarist came back, but Mike stayed in the band. So Mike became the singer of Monstrosity, which was like one of my favorite, metal bands. But they started off as Divine Rapture, and that was kind of they were supposed to be the next big thing in metal, and they never really caught their break. And their drummer really screwed them. They fired him on the spot, right?
Well, yeah.
So it was cool.
Yeah, that's grounds for dismissal, as we say in the corporate world,
so
right?
It was a super cool thing to see. And it was like, they could have just taken the high road and said, hey guys, we don't have a drummer, we're not going to do it. And some idiot in the crowd yells, I'll play without a drummer, and they did.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's unique. I've never seen that. But missing band members. I mean, some people seem to do it deliberately, right? One of the bands last night, Melting Rod, they didn't have a bass player. But it was still like grindcore type stuff. So you can crank shit up, and you get the sound right anyway. Something is Waiting, a local band. My wife is friends with a guitar player. They lost their bass player, and we're trying to find a new one, but couldn't. So the guitar player, he's a bit of an audio finagler too. So he managed to have this insane rack of equipment with octavers or whatever that was like, the bass usually just duplicates shit that I play anyway, right? So it's like, I figured out how it sounds like we have a bass player when we actually don't, through effects and stuff. So I think they're just a 3-piece now too. So they're drummer, him and the singer.
And it's ironic you mentioned that, because when we went to see Fozzy, there's a band called Crash Karma, and they are very unique because the guitarist, he built a guitar that's a guitar and a bass in the same guitar, and he explains how he did it, and he calls it Mrs. Frankenstein. And it basically, it's his wife is the drummer and singer, and he plays guitar and bass. They're a 2-piece. Sounds phenomenal. Like you couldn't tell that it wasn't a 4 or 5 piece band. It's just the two of them. But he explains in his Instagram videos about how he created Miss Frankenstein, where he added the extra string, drop tuned it. He's got the knob where it's supposed to be a treble, turns it into bass. So he's got 2 bass knobs on it. So he basically cranks it down, and when he plays, you could hear the guitar and the bass sound out of the same guitar. It's the coolest thing. But they were
Yeah.
another one. They were super unique. And he's like, well, we were in the same boat. They couldn't find a bassist. They couldn't find a singer. His wife sang, so she played drums too. So she sings and drums, and he plays bass and guitar out of the same instrument.
Yeah.
So it's a unique thing to see.
That's really cool. Yeah, I remember the presidents of the United States of America. They also had some sort of that kind of thing. Like it was both bass and guitar both at the same time. Both of them. So
and that's what made Mortician famous, right? The Chicago, horrorcore band.
Oh yeah.
Right?
I haven't checked them out yet.
Yeah, so Will Romer is their singer, and he has like the most. Him and Chris Barnes probably have the most intense growls in the metal business. Like Will Romer was something unique, but he had a guitar, and his bass was a machine. So his drums and bass were synthesizers basically, and he duplicated a drum sound and a bass sound. So it was him and a guitarist. It was just 2 of them, and he would program all the music, and that's how his songs became. Now, when they went live, they would hire a session drummer and a session bassist to play, but all the albums are just 2 guys. It's a drum machine and a bass machine, and he synthesized it to make it sound like it was a 4-piece band. So that's how Mortician got famous, because it was just the 2 of them. Will Romer sang and played bass on the tracking, but then machined it with a drum and a bass, and all he had was a guitarist. So it was just the 2 of them. So it's kind of a unique thing.
I will really need to look them up too, because I'm on the lookout for that weird shit now, right? It's like, I like it, right? But I have less of a desire to go look up all the metal bands that sound like metal bands, right? I'm like right now I'm really trying to get back to that place that when I was deep in the scene, or deeper in the scene at least, what you had to do, and that was to dig a few feet down below the surface to find the really interesting stuff. I thought most of it was kind of like samey before, right? But the more I dig now, there's some really cool shit there, and some names coming up that I really need to look out for when they're coming to play live. So I really want to see what that's like too. All the aggro tech, I think, is the music styles, and or cyber metal, or whatever, those guys that are doing metal, but with a lot of electronics or whatever, right? How do they do that?
I think Mortician, I don't know if they were the first band to do it, but they were a very early band, and they would take clips of horror movies. So like Night of the Living Dead, Zombie Apocalypse, and they would take sound bites from the movie and put them in the songs. So they would introduce them. So like, I think on Mortician's first album, they took the soundbite from Night of the Living Dead, where it's like, one day the world is going to come to a time when the dead is going to rise, and the zombies will walk the earth. And that's what started the song. And so they started sampling movies into their songs. And so I don't know if they were the first ones to do it, but they were very early on in that like early 90s scene to start incorporating sound bites to songs, which now is extremely popular in music in general, right? So Rob Zombie does it a lot, right? He takes, song like intros from like White Zombie and like all these other horror movies and incorporates them into the songs. But Mortician was doing that with actual sound bites and putting them into the album, and that's how they would lead into songs. So that was another cool thing about Mortician. That was
Yeah. That leads me to a bit of a memory. My first industrial band, I think we formed it in 90 something, and we did the same thing, because Ministry and so on, like there were a lot of samples, and I sat there with a microphone to the TV to record something off of VHS tape, like hitting the pendulum or whatever, and put it into the industrial music. That band, we played live twice. Just to get back to the live show type thing. So both of those shows have some stories to them. The first one is we actually got to play outside our hometown, which was a big deal for any band, really. It's like, we get to play somewhere else. Road trip. Sweden is a little bit different that way. But but it was at a pretty legendary place, and we were really excited. And then we had a paying audience of 4. Four
Hey,
people showed up,
it's a
but
win.
we were like, well, fuck it, we were psyched up or whatever.
And
So
now you feel like
we
rock
played
stars, right?
we played our hearts out, and turns out
That's
that
awesome.
2 of the guys that were there were actually pretty famous, or influential, right? You know, one was in a band called Mystery Loves Co. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and the other was playing in another industrial band that was a project of Sweden's biggest punk star of all time had formed. And they said, we know people that like this shit. You know, do you have any tapes with you? And it's like, yeah, and, no, I don't have a tape with me right now. Well, here's my address. You know, send me shit.
Right.
And then I dropped that. So
Yeah.
didn't happen, but that's
Sure.
still cool. You know, like even when
Yeah.
there's 4 people, you know, first of all, play your heart out, and
Right.
secondly, like, you don't know who those 4 are. You know, it could be like, you know, there's 2 people
Yeah.
that are more
Yeah.
influential than at the show where you're playing for 300.
Yeah.
The second gig we played, it was filmed on VHS, and a buddy had, you know, he was in charge of keeping it safe, and he didn't keep it safe. I think that he confessed to taping over it with some porn flick.
Sure. Right.
It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
But yeah, but that was a good show though. That was it was like a, you know, 5 bands playing that night, and it was back in those
Yeah.
days too, when it was like a punk rock band, a death metal band, and a, you know,
And
industrial
it's,
band, and something that was more synthy or whatever, right? You
yeah.
know, that was the one build. So you got a lot of people from all those subgenres in the same room, and everybody loved all of it
Right.
all at once.
And
So,
surprisingly enough, a good ministry story that I have is we went to see them at the House of Blues, and the band that opened for them was called Hansel and Gretel. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but
no,
they're a German band, and they have 2 males and 2 females in the band. One of the females plays guitar and sings, and the other guy plays bass and sings. The other female, I think, plays the other guitar and synth, and then the other guy is the drummer. They were incredible. They were better than Ministry.
tell you,
So
it's my internet. Oh, okay, sorry, I
yeah,
got a glitch. Yeah,
so
that,
that was a very unique thing, because I was a big Ministry fan, right?
yeah,
Like I liked the way that they had sounded, that kind of that speed goth punk horror metal type thing. They had their own thing going for a while. Al Jorgensen is, you know, love him or hate him, he's very talented in what he does, right? So
yeah,
it's, you know, he's very outspoken on a lot of stuff, but, you know, which kind of gets him in trouble a little bit. But like, you can't deny his musical ability. He's really incredible.
yeah. No, and I mean, it's part of the deal to be provocative too, right? You know, in
Right.
one way, shape, or form, right? It goes with it. You might not have to like it, but, you know, if you're not controversial, you know,
Yeah.
it's kind of takes it away a little
Right.
bit too, right?
Yeah, for
You know,
sure.
it's like, you know, gore are good. I mean, they're good music, right?
Yeah.
But it's totally about the live show, right? You know,
Yeah.
like,
Oh, that's
you
it.
know, gore
That's
is all about the get up and, you know, getting sprayed and all that stuff, right? And
right. All the blood and
they're
guts, and yeah.
obviously extremely offensive, right? Um, I saw Carcass also back in with their first album, Recomputerfaction. That's also another live memory. They sucked, unfortunately. Well, the drummer sucked. You know,
Okay.
Ken, whatever. He was terrible. But the story from that show is that one of the opening bands called Bad Dreams Always. I don't know if you've heard of surströmming. It's like a
Mm-mm.
fermented canned fish that stinks. You know, there was like a YouTube challenge on that
Okay.
some time ago. But anyway, so they opened those cans and put fans behind them, so the entire venue was just stinking of the most vile stench you've ever had. You know, it's like, so Carcass, they were like, okay, we're not getting up on stage until this smell
Yeah.
is out of here. So got a bit delayed, but that was fun. But but that's also, you know, they had their big thing was, you know, all the, especially in the beginning, the collages of, you know, diseases and slaughtered, pieces of flesh or whatever, right? So that was the first time I think that I went to a show that had a projector screen, and they just projected that, through the whole show, just all these gross medical book clippings, so that made it enjoyable, though, just because it was like, whoa, I've never seen this before. That's cool.
It's funny because I have a story, not in that vein, but like, have you ever heard of the band the Deftones? They're pretty popular. They're kind of
Deftones,
like
yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
some people are fans of them, right? And so I felt horrible for them. They played Ozfest. I want to say it was like either 2000 or 2001. Whoever booked this venue dropped the ball on it. They put Slayer, the Deftones, or no, wait, was it? Yeah, it was Slayer, then the Deftones, then Rob Zombie. And so you don't put the Deftones in between those two bands. Like, they're not the same. So Slayer gets off. Slayer completely rocks the place. They're awesome. Everyone's yelling Slayer. The Deftones get on, and they start off with like this kind of ballad almost type thing. And back in the day, they don't do it anymore. And I think because of the show. But or was it? It wasn't Alpine Valley. It was it Alpine Valley? It might have been. I don't know. It was one of the shows that have the hill. I think it was Alpine Valley. So I'm pretty sure it was Alpine Valley because they had the giant hill and everyone kind of sat in it, right? Well, that day, Ozfest was always mid-July for us. It was 100 degrees and, things were super expensive. And so they used to sell these giant iced teas, and in them, they would put whole lemons. They would like cut to slit a lemon in it and they would drop it in there. During the Deftones set, people were taking the lemons out of the iced teas and chucking it at the stage, like relentlessly throwing these lemons at the stage. And they're like baseballs, right? Like they're like the size of like, they'll do some damage if you get hit. And I remember it was the first song into it. And you see probably 15,000 lemons flying towards the stage. So Chino gets up and says, if somebody throws one more lemon, we're out of here. You just saw the place massacre the stage with lemons. They were relentless. They played one song and they left. And then Rob Zombie got on and made the joke about, he's like, well, I hope everybody's out of lemons. And they went right into Thunder Kiss. It was awesome. And the place erupted and it was all, but I mean, I that was like one of the funniest things I've ever seen. But it was like, you felt bad for the Deftones, right? Because I was never a fan, but like they didn't deserve that. Like the metal fans were ruthless. But whoever decided to put them between Slayer and Rob Zombie needed a lesson in booking.
That's bad planning, and the behavior is uncharacteristic. I mean, I know that you get bad eggs or whatever, but I've never seen an entire audience go against anything.
And if they ever had like, this is obviously before like recordings were a big thing, but I'm sure somewhere at some time, if you could YouTube Deftones and Lemons and at Ozfest, there's probably footage of it, because it was not like one or two lemons. It was like 15,000 people. Like people were going to buy lemonade just for the lemons to chuck them at the Deftones. Like that's how it got. They were like 4 minutes into their first song. And Chino he said, if you guys throw one more lemon, we're out of here. And it just was like a rainfall of lemons, and they left. And then, like I said, Rob Zombie got on and rocked the place. It was just so unique, though. But it was a cool concert experience being there, seeing that.
Yeah.
Like, it was...
Yeah, you were there for that. But yeah, I feel bad for Deftones too.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I bought their first album when it came out, because it was shortly after Korn came out with their first album, right? Yeah. And it was kind of sort of a little bit in that vein.
Right. Not as good. I think Korn's the anomaly, right? Like, I think maybe them and Disturbed arguably are like considered new metal bands, but that like Korn can share the stage with pretty much anybody and rock it. They're pretty good. I'll give them props for that. They were solid throughout their career.
Korn, when that first album came out, it was just on the strength of being different in a really cool way that just appealed to people, and it was the right time too. So it was one of those. I mean, I can totally confess to having been elitist. Like it's like it was, nobody knew about Korn when I bought that CD. I listened to it basically the day it came out came to the record store, and it was like, holy fucking
Yeah.
shit, that,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
it was like, okay, like 10 seconds into the CD, I'm buying this. And then it obviously took off. By
Sure.
6 months later, they were big, and so then it wasn't interesting anymore. So I never got to see much more of them, and I kind of sort of lost interest because it felt like it was being for the kids now.
Yeah.
Like, so I can be
You know.
snobby that way, but I wouldn't be snobby in a
Sure.
way
No,
to
that's the one.
to throw
That's like
lemons
the unique
at
thing.
anybody on
Right.
stage.
That's like the one unique thing about metal. It's like when somebody makes it, it's like they automatically get pinned as the sellouts, right? Like they're not a garage band anymore. They're not a local band. Like they're now mainstream, and it's like they've sold out. And it's a very unique thing, because you want to cheer for your band, right? Like when they become big and now everybody knows about them, like you should be happy for them. But in like the metal community, it's like we lost our band, right? That was our band, and now they're everybody's band.
Yeah, I'd say that for me, it wasn't necessarily thinking that they sold out. I think it was more like, uh, well, I used to have to find and research and talk to other people, and then I
Right.
can connect with people through that, right? But when I can read about, Korn in the local newspaper, they have reviewed the album or whatever, like, then it's not, the
Yeah.
novelty is gone, right? So it's like, okay, you guys have left my scene, cool, go
Yeah.
play for the kids now, right? And
Right.
that was fine, but it was still like, I that was an automatic, I'm not interested in you guys anymore.
Yeah.
uh, but there are some bands that's still stuck and were interesting, right? Not that I've followed Slayer again, like, I, but Seasons in the Abyss and whatever, right?
Hmm.
That's kind of like when I dropped off a little bit from that. But I mean, they got huge, in metal terms at least, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
and
Yeah.
but they were just so fucking honest about it, and they kind of still stuck to their
Yeah.
underground personas so much, right? That it was still like, yeah, no, you're famous, but you're
Right. Yeah.
you're still relevant, like,
Yeah.
you're just too good to
Yeah. They
not be.
they they were good. Like
So
so in Chicago, like I had mentioned before, like I think our group that's like that was Disturbed, because
right,
Disturbed used to play the Metro for like $6. Like you could see them pretty much every Friday and Saturday night. They were always there. They would play every local bar in Chicago, and you would see them for a $5 cover charge, right? If they played it wasn't the Pumping Company. I forgot where they played, but some bar had a special. It was like it was penny pitchers. So it was a $10 cover charge, and then a pitcher of beer was a penny, and it was like the cheapest, you know, dime store beer you could get. It was foul, but it was still a penny, right? So you'd buy these little pitchers for a penny, but you pay $10 at the door. And Disturbed will play those like bands all the time. They were just kind of there. You'd see them for literally $10, and then they got huge globally, and then
yeah,
now it costs $65-$70 to see a Disturbed, and it was like a year ago I was watching them, fall down at the Metro, right? And it's like now they're huge.
yeah, yeah. No, it's a little bit funny too. So going back, I'm aging myself a lot more than you, but so in Sweden, there were, at least in the area where I lived, not that many bands came, and there were a limited number of quality local bands too, right? That could stand up to playing us alongside with Sepultura or that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
So Entombed, they were sort of like more or less the go-to house band type of thing.
Right.
Like, they were the opening band for the three others that came along, right? So it's like, Entombed again. Yeah, they're fucking awesome. It's really good, and then obviously they became Entombed
Right.
Entombed.
Yeah.
But that was also one of those where it's like, good on them,
Yeah.
and I can't fault them for anything either, right? I mean, they're not as huge as Disturbed or whatever, probably, but yeah,
Yeah. They
they
were.
they are also fantastic live.
Yeah.
Like I saw them years later too at a festival. I think it was probably, what was the Wolverine Blues to Right Shoot Straight
Right. Yeah.
era, when they
Yeah.
were doing the death rock thing. So I think that was the last last time that Nicky was playing with him, the drummer.
Yeah, because
Um,
Entombed is a weird, like an eclectic like thing because when Wolverine Blues came out, that was almost like, and I don't want to necessarily say that it was like stoner metal, but it was definitely like the doomier, chunkier, like it paved the way for like Mastodon and like all the other bands that kind of came after them, like the Dillinger Escape Plan that were kind of doing that. Like Entombed was like really the pioneers of that, like kind of, I don't want to say grungy like heaviness, but like they had a very unique sound and a very, and it was like kind of like that precursor to like stoner metal, like doom metal, before it was like popular. Like they were really like in that realm.
yeah, I actually talked to Nick a little bit about that, and it was kind of he was a main songwriter, right? But he rediscovered Kiss.
Right.
So it turned into, I think that he called it death and roll or death rock. But yeah, I forget the song title now, but there's one song where he's totally put in the Detroit Rock City drum fill, you
Yeah.
know, is in there. So like he wanted to start playing rock and roll,
Right.
and that's kind of, so he quit Entombed and started Helicopters. That was more of a rock band, right?
Yeah.
Um, but they were so good live too, and so tight. The tightest band I've ever seen, if we want to go into that, and you said Pantera, I think that the tightest I've seen was Refused.
Okay.
That's more, yes, you, I can call it metal. I mean, some people say that it's hardcore. They were
Yeah.
labeled straight edge hardcore in Sweden or
Yeah.
whatever, but
Right.
it still sounds very thrashy to me, type of thing. But um, they were, immaculate. Like, and they do all that's stupid jumping around that all emo bands do now too.
Yeah.
But all this spinning, and
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of that shit. But the fact that they were so tight and they were moving the way that it was, fucking incredible. It was like,
Yeah.
miss a beat at any point.
Yeah, there were a lot. So like I've seen a lot of bands that were like they just played well together, right? Like there were I remember the first time I saw Shadows Fall, they were very, very, very unique, right? Because they had that kind of thrash, hardcore punk mixed into like everything. And Brian's fair hair is like 9 feet long, like it's down to his ankles. He's got dreadlocks that he's been growing since he's like 15 years old. And so like he would whip his head around and like you just see these dreads like in this giant like and they were very very tight as a band. They were very very solid. And Killswitch Engage was like that too. The first time I saw Killswitch, even prior to Howard Jones, when Jesse Leach was first in the band, they were just something else. Like there was something special about them. Like when they played, you just knew that they were going to go, like they were too good not to be recognized. They were like, they just sounded great. Their guitar, like Adam's guitar, was just perfectly tuned. They were all in sync, like all in rhythm. They're and sometimes it's hard to find that, right. And I think one band that gets lost in it for me is Slipknot, right? Like there's so much going on, you just don't really get the music, right? Like there's three different drummers, there's four guitarists, a bassist, and basically a DJ, and like nothing like blends, right? It's just kind of noise to me, where like that's kind of where like like where Killswitch was in, like they were just like tight, like perfectly uniform, and they did the whole whipping the guitars around and dancing around too. Like Adam wore a Superman cape on stage. He was goofy as hell, but I mean, like musically, they were just incredible. Like they were just one of the bands that were like they're gonna go places, and they did.
Yeah, yeah. No, and that's also one of the key things, like to go away from a show and feel like the sound was great. Like a lot of it is like how tight was the band, right? It comes from that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
and the
like,
one thing and the one thing about Pantera too is when I after I left the show, I think my ears rang for about 4 days. That's how loud
yeah,
it was, and loud and good, right? Like no matter where you were at, because the first time I saw him was UIC, and the noise was just bellowing, like it was so incredibly loud, but like precise. It was like my ears rang. I think for 3 days after that, it was like I just couldn't get it to go away. It was that decibel loudness.
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that used to be at every
Right.
every show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm old and I have to take care of my hearing a little bit. I forgot
Yeah,
my
that's it,
earplugs
right?
yesterday, but it seems like it wasn't too loud either.
Yeah.
So it was even when it was mostly grindcore bands, like it was still. I can still hear you now, so
Yeah.
that's all good. I think.
And the grindcore scene has changed a lot, right? Like, back in
Oh
the
yeah,
day it was just as loud, obnoxious, and fast as you could play, right? Just somebody screaming into the microphone, and like now it's kind of like it's gotten to the point where it's like it's music again, right? Like it's enjoyable. Like you have these bands that like are good musicians, like they're solid musicians, and it's just kind of like it's
yeah,
nah, it's
yeah, yeah. I was stepping away from the live show thing a little bit, but I think the first time I heard grindcore um, be sort of more than just noise, right? That was Terrorizer World Downfall. So it was Pete Sandoval.
mm,
I credit with, you know, having created the legible blast beat.
right.
It
Yeah,
was like before that, it was just like, play as fast as you can. I don't give a shit if it's,
right.
if there's any sort of beat to it or whatever, right? But Pete Sandoval, then just it was, and it was well engineered too.
Yeah,
That album, right? So you could hear it. But I think that was one of those records where it was like, okay, grindcore can actually be something that can spread a little bit more, and I create Pete Sandoval
yeah,
for that blast beat, you know, the legible blast beat to be
yeah.
so common, right?
I remember the first time I heard the band Immolation, they were like that for me, right? Because they were like kind of a death metal. They were unique because it wasn't just like death metal. It was like they had that like unique kind of almost, I don't want to say softness, but they were just technically sound, right? They were
Yeah,
precise, and they had like intricate melodies throughout like a death metal song. And then they kind of went into the grindcore thing for a little bit. Then they came out of it. They went like straight death metal again. Then they went kind of more like hardcore metal type stuff. So Immolation was like one of those unique bands that were really, and the singer too. I don't know if you've ever like seen the singer of Immolation, but the dude is jacked. Like he's the first musician I've ever seen that was like a bodybuilder, that was like singing death metal, and when he held the microphone you could see the ripples in his arms. Like that's how like in shape this dude was.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's that's why drummers are skinny too most of the time. I think in the
Right.
metal genre, like they work so fucking hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
because everyone always used to like kind of give Glenn Danzig his props, right, for being the the kind of rock star that was in like shape, right, like cut and lean, and always had the six pack, and like obviously worked out and was kind of. But the dude from Immortal would have crushed Glenn Danzig in terms of like pure strength and size, right? Kind of like a Peter Steele, right? Like Pete Steele was 6'7", 250 of like rock solid muscle. But the
yeah.
guy from Immolation was like the Pete Steele, but he was like 5'6". But he was just jacked. He was huge. When we saw him at Metal Fest, he was a little guy, but his shoulders, like his trap muscle was like it came out of his ears. Like that's how like big this dude was. He was just like into lifting weights, like just a complete bodybuilder. But it was just like it's
Yeah. Yeah, let's
funny to
watch him
see.
off Henry Rollins around.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You mentioned Pete Steele. That's another great show I went to. That was fantastic. It was I think it was the November Rust tour.
Okay.
Um, and obviously they're not, the people that hang around or bang their heads very much. And obviously they played pretty slow and all that stuff. So it was not,
Mm-hmm.
um, but they had this weird stage presence, and Pete Steele, he was just being self-derogatory a lot. Like he was really, really funny in the darkest sense possible, right?
Yeah.
So it was, and the sound was fantastic. So it was one of those where it was a multi-sensory experience type of thing. That was really awesome, and that was a good venue too. That was at a place called Geno's in Stockholm. I remember there was. Have you heard of Monster Magnet? They were a bit
Uh
more of
huh.
a stoner.
Yeah.
Uh, the singer
Space
lived
Ghost.
in Russia. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I saw them at that venue too, and they were just on. Like that was, that's the band I've seen that can antagonize or get the audience participation the
Yeah.
most by just getting them going. Dave Windorf, he was a master at getting the audience going.
Yeah.
And they were really good too. Like he couldn't have been very stoned while playing, because it would just
Right.
it sounded so fucking good,
Yeah. That's so.
but
So I know we touched on this before, but like growing up in Sweden, culturally, obviously a lot different than the United States. But
mhm.
who would you say was like, the like the band, like if you were to say a band that like would be recognizable from Sweden, who would you say that is? Or like a
In metal,
person that, yeah.
in metal, I would say Entombed first, really.
Okay.
Um, because I think they're the biggest. I mean, you see those T-shirts at
Sure.
every metal tour you go to. Um, so I'd put them pretty solidly at the very top.
Okay.
Second would be Meshuggah, because most
Right.
they're so influential. All the
Sure.
gent bands sound like Meshuggah, so that would be number two. Then there's a slew of the number threes, right? And there some of the black metal bands, right? What are they called? Like Dark Funeral, and those people
Mm-hmm.
are pretty famous. But the problem is that we also have shit like Ghost. I really don't like Ghost, and I don't
Yeah.
like that they're called metal or whatever. But now I'm getting
Right.
elitist here again. But
No, it's
but
okay
there's
because Kerry King feels the same way you do. He
yeah
tears them apart in every interview. He says
yeah
he was asked one time, Metal Hammer did an interview with him, and they said, "What do you think about Ghost?" And he laughed and he goes, "What a shitty band." He goes, "They're not even metal." He goes, "Why are you asking me?" And
yeah yeah.
so yeah,
They're pop, with metal instruments or whatever. And then anyway,
yeah,
don't
and they're
even
and
get me
again
started.
going
But
right
yeah,
and going on with
but
Ghost,
they're
right?
still
Like
generally considered metal, and
yeah,
they're from
and
Sweden,
I
and they're
love
one of the
like
biggest bands on the planet. So
yeah,
I guess I have to
and
go with
that's the
that.
greatest thing about Ghost, right? Is like Tobias created this like unique thing in secrecy because he tells you, I have famous musicians that play with me all the time. They're behind the mask. Like it was rumored Dave Grohl was their drummer during one tour, that he played every night with them in a mask, and nobody knew it was Dave Grohl. And Dave Grohl said it was me. I was playing with them. And there's been a bunch of other musicians, bassists and guitarists, that are like famous behind the mask, and they say, yeah, I played 3 shows with them. That was, when they were in LA, I was their guitarist. And it's like, okay. So obviously they have namesake in the metal world, right? Like if you have guys that are
Yeah,
playing with them. So I think that's his kind of mystique, right? That it's like, he took this character and he took these musicians and he says, well, you never know who you're going to get because it could be so and so from this band or it could be so and so from this band. And that's
yeah,
kind of the, people go to the shows to see who's going to be playing with them because it could be somebody uber famous.
yeah. That's probably what happened after he screwed over the original band
The
members,
original,
right?
right? Yeah.
Yeah, because he screwed them over
Yeah.
royally. So not only bad music, but he's a douche too.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry. Uh, but yeah, no, I guess that's fun. But then when you find out afterwards, it's like, oh, well,
Right.
okay, cool. You know, uh, yeah. During that trial, by the way, he was more concerned about they're going to put my actual real name on the legal documents here in this lawsuit.
Yeah.
I don't want
And
anyone to
everybody
know
knew
who
it
I
was him,
am.
right?
Like that's your big concern.
Yeah. And he
Like,
took that, and he was
fuck you.
famously took that picture with Phil Anselmo. There was like 8 people in it, and Tobias was in the picture. Like, and it was like, that's the singer from Ghost. And it's like everybody knew who it was. It wasn't like a secret. Like people knew who he was. Like it wasn't, when it came out, people are like, yeah, no big deal. We knew it was him. Like, I don't see what
Yeah.
the issue was.
Yeah. Anyway, real irrelevant band to me.
Right.
But when you asked that question, I kind of had to include them there.
Sure. Yeah.
Then we have a band, and I also wouldn't call it metal really, but I apologize on behalf of the country of Sweden on their behalf, and that's Europe.
Yeah.
The final countdown.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing. But
I mean,
everybody
he
knows
got plenty of those, right?
everybody knows that little synth riff and so on. So yeah. Um, but so I wouldn't say that that's representative. But actually, around that time in the mid '80s, there were a lot of the hair metal, glam rock bands
Hmm.
that were actually pretty famous over here too in the US, from Scandinavia. Were pretty, but it was mostly
Yeah,
like power ballads and shit that they got famous for
right.
instead of the more
Where
hard
was
rock
Hanoi Rocks
stuff.
from?
Finland.
Were they were Finland? Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
all right.
Uh, yeah, and they were interesting because they were kind of almost like New York Dolce, right?
Yeah,
They were
nah,
they were sleazier than sleaze, right?
right. Yeah,
But
and a
but
lot of those bands from Europe now, I think Finland and Norway and Denmark have a lot of those like bands like Santa Cruz now is one of them. They sound like they're right out of the 1980s, and they're from I want to say I think Denmark.
okay,
So there's a lot of them now that are coming out. Something's Candy. They're I can't think of their name, but it's something Candy. They're like that. Now they play like 80s like care sound, but they're a newer band. Um, there's quite a few now that have come out from like Europe that are in that vein of 80s metal.
oh really? Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you would ask me about Denmark, it's Merciful Fate or King Diamond,
yeah,
same thing. That
right.
that's that would be a clear number one there. Uh, Otherwise, there's another band called Disneyland After Dark. Uh,
Yeah.
Not very good, but that would be like,
Where's Peter Tagerton from? From Hypocrisy. Is
he's
he
Swedish.
is he?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Hypocrisy are Swedish. It was funny. I was just talking to Buddy drummer for If I Were the Devil last night about producers that had impact, right? So he's a mega producer,
Yeah.
right? And Paul was a member of Hypocrisy from back in the day. And I think last week we talked about Dan Swano of Edge of Sanity was another one of
Hmm.
those producers that have made
Yeah.
major impact, and not many
Yeah.
have heard of him, right?
Because he got
But
he because not a lot of people. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But like Peter Tagerton played with Tal Lindemann on his
oh yeah,
right, so he produced
yeah,
that, but then he also sang and played guitar on that as well.
yeah,
So it's kind of cool that like not many people, well, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, but like I didn't know it for at first, and then I was like, oh, that's who that is.
yeah. Ooh, now I'm completely changing the subject, but I just remember
Yeah.
one more fun thing that I saw live. So it must have been 99 or 91. It was a punk pop band called Moses, and they sang songs in Swedish, about how you need to put down your guns and be like, it was all like positive message.
Hmm.
The bass player was Morgan, who later the next year or something formed Marduk.
Okay.
So a little bit of a contrast
Yeah.
there between
Right. Yeah.
uh, punk pop singing about
Yeah. Then goes
pacifist message, and then
one of the
next
most
year he's got Marduk.
satanic metal bands ever.
So that was kind of fun. Like,
Yeah.
that's Smoke. Like, oh shit, what's he doing now?
That's funny.
Yeah, that was funny. So that's one of those things that I can talk to black metal people about. It's like, yeah, Marduk.
Yeah. And
But
it's funny because obviously I'm wearing a Cradle Filth shirt, right? And like I'm a black metal fan, and I don't believe in that kind of stuff, right? Like the devil and like demons and stuff. Like obviously they're ultra satanic, but like the music, like seeing a black metal band is unlike any other experience you're ever gonna get, right? Like it's a very unique thing, and we can say this now because we're both married, but like the girls that come to black metal shows, it's unique, right? It's very weird. It's a very eclectic group of
yeah,
people that go to these shows. It's unlike any other metal show that you could see if you go to a black metal, whether it's Dimmu, Cradle, Marduk, 1349, Immortal, any one of the plethora of black metal bands. When you go and see them, it's like it's a show within a show. Like it's a spectacle.
Yeah. But that's, you're touching on something too that I think is special about metal, right? And I mean, if people are watching this, they all know this, so it feels like I'm educating the educated a little bit. But when I went to the show last night at Reggie's, I show up. I went there early because I was going to try to chat with
Yeah,
Tobin a bit, but he didn't have time. Or he was trying to just stay alive, I think.
sure.
But I show up, and there's expecting to see like metal fans standing there in line early or whatever, right? But it's a fucking mass of Creed fans, so like jocks in with their
Yeah,
golf shirts and muscle shirts or whatever,
right.
with Creed on them. And I was like, I felt so out
Yeah,
of place. It's really funny. Like I was
yes,
expecting to go there and be like, my
right.
people, and it's
Yeah,
like, oh no, this is the antithesis of
right,
that. Like, and then, but it turns out that Creed were playing in town, and there were buses going
right.
out of Reggie's to there. So then when they
Yeah,
left, it was like left with 20 people there.
right. Yeah,
We're waiting, so it's like, whew, now I'm good. But I think it's interesting too at shows, because most people are introverts, I think, in the scene,
yeah,
like, or pretty shy people, right? Super nice people. But I think that's also why, the battle vests with all the patches on them, or,
yeah,
you think really hard about what t-shirt am I going to wear,
yeah.
because whatever t-shirt I'm wearing
Right.
is sending a
Yeah,
message, who
yeah,
do I want to talk to tonight? Like, and you kind of know that, well, the guy with the Cannibal Corpse t-shirt is someone that's not that deep into
right,
it or whatever, but I've never heard of that band on that
right.
t-shirt before, so that guy must know shit.
Yeah. It's funny
Oh,
because there was an old movie called PCU, right? And it's got they're like college kids, and they're partying and they're doing everything. And I can't think of the name of the band. It was like it wasn't the Melvins, but it was something like that, right? And he's wearing the shirt, and Jeremy Piven goes, "Don't be that guy." He goes, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Don't be that guy that wears the band of the shirt you're going to see." So it was always kind of like if you're going to a Slayer show, you don't wear a Slayer shirt, wear a Pantera shirt,
right.
wear a Megadeth shirt, right? Like, and the same with like Pantera. Don't wear an Ozzy shirt, or wear a Sabbath shirt, or wear something else. It was like, don't be that guy.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I know, totally. It's like, do you want people to talk to me tonight, or do I just want to stay in a corner?
Yeah,
Like, I think it's funny. I also think it's funny that you can buy already pre-made battle vests now, like with
yeah,
patches already pre-assembled on them. So
right.
it's kind of fun to do a bit of people watching and see like who
The
bought theirs
collection.
at Amazon, and who
Yeah,
actually,
the collection's
you know,
over, right? Everyone's got a Venom patch on, and Venom hasn't made a patch in 20 years.
yeah, and when all of the patches are in the exact same
Yeah,
condition, then you know that
right. Yeah.
you decided to, yeah.
And it's
Anyway,
unique too, because like the ones that are pre-made are going to have your standard Megadeth, Pantera, Slayer. They're not going to have Motorhead. They're not going to have like they're like when someone builds it themselves, and you see Obituary, or you see like like you mentioned Cannibal Corpse earlier, right? Like
yeah,
if somebody built a vest themselves, or if somebody brought the prefabricated one, just by the patches that are on it. Like
yeah, yeah,
if it's got a Metallica patch on it, it's probably bought, right? Because nobody puts Metallica patches on anything,
right.
right?
that's
Especially on a
that's the
hardcore like, yeah, that's like the no, right? That's like the one band that never goes on a vest.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's funny. Yeah, no, I mean, after all these years, it's still fun to do a bit of friendly, non-judgmental people watching, right?
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and
you have to, right? And
still
and
judge
it's
them and
good,
guess
right?
and make
Because
jokes or whatever, right? But it's
right,
it's all in the head or whatever, right?
yeah, and then it's crazy too, because you have like mainstream celebrities like Kanye West. He's always wearing like death metal band shirts, and they're like, you're like, he wearing it just because he's Kanye West, or does he like actually listen to the band, right? And that was the big thing when Demi Lovato went on or was it Letterman, right? And Letterman's like, "What shirt are you wearing?" She's like, "Oh, Job for a Cowboy." She's like, "I love those guys," and it was like, "Who's Job for a Cowboy?" And everybody the next day it was like the most like Googled band was Job for a Cowboy because Demi Lovato was wearing their shirt on Letterman.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a unique
Yeah.
phenomenon, right? That like they're and I remember I think Kanye was wearing. Was it Decapitated? He was wearing some like obscure metal band. It wasn't like a normal like one that you could just go to Hot Topic and buy. It was like a really like bizarre one that was like, does he really know who that is, or does he just like the logo, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. 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 You never know. But that's another category that's fun to try to spot.
yeah,
Who's the hot topic kid here? Yeah.
right,
Did you get that at Spencer's?
yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody can get
Uh,
a Misfit shirt at
it's,
Hot Topic, right?
it's
Yeah.
it's fun. But I'm not gonna knock them either. It's
No, at least
it's
they're
an
there,
easy
right? They're
it's
there
an easy
support the
find.
scene, and
It's an easy thing to spot, and
yeah,
sometimes it's
right,
embarrassing too. Like I've never owned a Slayer T-shirt. Would I like to
yeah,
have a Slayer T-shirt? I would love to have a Slayer T-shirt. I
right,
am too embarrassed to go buy one now. But
yeah,
if I wanted to get one, I probably would just sort of sneak in at a Spencer's at the mall and
right,
pick
yeah.
one up.
They're relatively
You know,
easy to get, right? Yeah,
so I don't want to knock people that do that.
yeah.
But you see what I'm saying, though.
Yeah,
Um,
it's easy, right? Like you go, you look at the bands that are out there, right? Like, for example, I'm wearing the shirt, right? Cradle of Filth. Their stuff was everywhere. You could walk into any Hot Topic and buy any one of Cradle's like things just because they were so incredibly popular and like everybody knew who they were. But if you didn't know who Cradle of Filth was, you were like in for a rude awakening because you liked the shirt and you liked the logo, but you didn't know the band, right? So like Danny
yeah,
Filth was like an anomaly within himself. But like when Cradle started, he had five of the best musicians on the face of the earth playing with him. Right, Nick Barker is probably one of the best drummers in metal, and he was there behind the kit for a decade before he went to Dimmu. So it was like you have like a good band, but they just like culturally caught on, right? And it was like people didn't even know the music; they just liked the shirts,
yeah,
and they
yeah.
had
No,
one
it's
of the
true.
most obscure shirts ever made. I'm
Yeah.
sure you know which one I'm talking about.
No, I didn't quite hear it. Sorry.
So Cradle of Filth has one of the most obscure shirts ever made. And if you don't know what it is, I don't want to
No,
stop
I
and
don't.
show it here.
I have to confess. I don't know much about him. And I actually last night too is like, oh, that's a funny slogan. It's like, what are you talking about? That's Cradle of Filth. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
And, and
Uh,
and again, like I saw Cradle of Filth, and I'll tell you, one of the best opening bands ever for a band was Cradle of Filth, and God Forbid played with them. I don't know if you are familiar with God Forbid, but they their lead singer is a black eye Byron, and he is incredible. And they had two twins. Doc and Dallas Coyle are the guitarists, and Doc Coyle played with Bad Wolves and a bunch of other like metal acts. After that, I think he played with Five Finger for a little bit. He filled in one. Their guitarist went down when Chris Cowell got hurt. Doc filled in for them. But God Forbid, like, rocked that show. Like, you couldn't have asked for a better opening band for a metal act than God Forbid opening for Cradle, because they just set the tone for Cradle. They had the crowd so amped up and they were just hardcore, like heavy, good, technically sound. And then when Cradle came out, they were on another level. Like Danny was doing he had just started where he got like I don't know, like models, I guess you can call them, like the super hot goth girls dancing on stage. And he had this like grinder. And so he would wear this like metal plate on his vest and he would grind it and the
oh
spark
yeah,
would
yeah,
go.
yeah.
Yeah, so like that was like the first time he started doing that. That was at the House of Blues in Chicago. But like God Forbid rocked that place and got like, and Cradle came on, it was just like another level. But they were like just for a black metal band, they were technically sound. Like they were on another level. They were really good.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was a unique thing. And ever since then, I was like a Cradle of Filth fan. So like when Bam, like I said, Bam Margera had a show Viva the Bam, and he had Danny on, and he like kind of introduced the Cradle of Filth, and I'm like I've been a Cradle fan since like 1990, and this is like 2001. I'm like, so 11 years later, like I've been Dusk and Her Embrace and Vampire of Evil Made Flesh, like all their older stuff. Like people are like into like Nymphetamine, and it's like go back and look at their like early stuff, right? Like that's true black metal. And
Yeah,
this new stuff is like not that. Synthesizers and symphonies and orchestras is not what they were.
yeah. No, that's true. And I mean, I never really got into the black metal thing, you know, like it was, if anything, early on with Bathory
Hmm.
or that sort of thing, but with everything else going on, because there was a lot of shit going on. Like
Yeah.
that's when all the genres were created, basically, right?
Right.
That was, or being refined, and that was just not one that I got into. I didn't get into the
Yeah.
Burzum or Dark Throne type thing. Like there was a lot more other stuff going on that I like better. So black metal is just something I really don't
Yeah.
know much about, other than
And
the soap
I
opera of the Norwegians. So
Yeah, and I got to be honest with you, I went down the rabbit hole because of Pantera, right? Because Phil in like the mid 90s, I think it was like 96, 95, like Far Beyond Driven it came out, and then um what's the one with the rattlesnake on it? I can't remember the name of the album right now. But anyways, that's when he started like growing his hair out. So it was like he went from bald to like kind of had the like longer hair. It wasn't as long as it was like during Reinventing Steel, but during that time, that was like I said, 94, 95 ish, and he started going into like that like hardcore metal stuff. And I remember I watched a video with him on an interview, and he was wearing a Dark Throne shirt, and I didn't know who Dark Throne was. And this is pre-internet. It's not like you could just go to a computer, pick up your phone, and say who was Dark Throne. And I remember like doing like research, like try to find out like who they were, and like reading Metal Edge magazine, and like Hit Parader, and all these other like harder metal magazines to try to find out who Dark Throne was. And then once I found out who they were, I went to the record store, and I remember I bought their self-titled one, Dark Throne, Dark Throne, and I was like, this is awful. Like, why the hell does like he get into this? Like, I don't understand. And so I was like, all right. So in the when you opened up a CD back in the day, and you had like you'd unfold the leaflet, and then in the back they would say, well, we would like to thank Cradle of Filth, we'd like to thank Immortal, we'd like to thank Burzum, we'd like to thank. And so they were listing all these bands, and I'm like writing them down, like, all right, Immortal, Burzum, Cradle of Filth, Dimmu, all the other ones, Marduk, and so I'm like, all right, now I got to find out these. And then I think it was Emperor was the first black metal band that I listened to, and I was like, I like this. Like, this is good. Like, it's not just. And so Emperor kind of like brought me into that, kind of really good black metal music, as opposed to just thrashing guitars and thrashing drums that just sounded like it was recorded, in a a garage somewhere.
yeah,
So Emperor was like my lead into like real like black metal. And then from there, I think it went from Emperor to Cradle pretty quick. And then once I hit Cradle, I was like, all right, this is like, these are musicians that play this kind of music. It's not just four dudes that sounded like they picked up a guitar yesterday.
right, yeah. So do you still feel the same about the Dark Throne stuff, or has that
It's
grown
grown
on
on
you
me,
over time?
right? So it's like I appreciate it for what it is now, right? Like just the raw recording of basically a cassette tape and a recorder and four dudes in a cave with
Yeah,
this sound on. Like, so I appreciate like them making music in that regard, because it was their only way to do it. And again, when you listen to like the United States metal at the time, that's recording studio, right? Thousands of dollars of equipment
yeah,
versus a tape recorder and four instruments and four amps, right? Like, that's what the early black metal stuff was. So I appreciate it more now. But when I first got into it, I was like, what is the appeal to this? This is awful.
yeah,
Until I heard Emperor. Emperor was like the first one that was like musically good. And I was like, this is like, I get this now. Like, I like that. And then from Emperor, it went to Cradle pretty quick. And then from Cradle, it went to Dimmu. And that was kind of like the black metal stuff, but that was actually in recording studios. So it sounded good. It wasn't raspy. It wasn't like,
right,
crunchy, and like it sounded well produced. And then once I started going back into the older Dark Thrones and the Mayhems and the early Immortals and stuff like that, where literally they were recording with cassette tapes. Like, I appreciated it a lot more, but I just didn't like it when I first heard it. I was like, I don't
right.
know what the appeal is. But then it was cool. Like, the artwork was really cool, right? Like Dark Thrones, it had Ferentz's hand like this, grabbing the sky with the lightning. And it's like, all right, this is cool, right? So the appeal was there. Like, visually, it was good. But just when you put the CD and you hit the play button, you're like, oh, this is awful. Like, what is this noise? Like, it's terrible.
Yeah, I think I mean getting a little sidetracked from the live show thing now,
Right,
but
right.
I just want to make this last point. I think that's one of those things that in the pre-internet era, right? You know, like you went to a record store and you flipped
Yeah.
through everything, right? And the first thing you know, probably that you make a choice on is what does the cover look like, right?
Yeah.
You know, so it's definitely visual at first,
Yeah.
but then when you actually buy the album, and maybe you were at the record store where they would let you listen to it for a bit
Hmm. Yeah.
before you bought it, unless it was wrapped like plastic wrap, you know, so you couldn't, and you just had to sort of like gamble those $40 or whatever
Right.
that
Yeah.
you didn't have to buy the record, right? But then you had it, right, and you had to listen to it over
Yeah.
and
You
over
were
again.
all in
Like
at that
it
point, right?
wasn't just like
Yeah.
I'll listen 10 seconds in and then I'll skip to the next band on Spotify, right? You know, like it was first you had to convince yourself that it didn't do, you know,
Right.
waste your money.
Yeah.
Secondly, so even if you didn't think that it was good, it's like, well, maybe it'll become good if I listen to it 10 times,
Hmm.
right? You know, so you gave yourself that patience, and I think that's something that's not there as much anymore, right? You know,
No,
it's
it's
a
not.
lot
Now
it's,
it's
it's a
sound
lot
bites,
more
right?
disposable, right?
And I'm the
um
most guilty of that now, right? Like I'll scroll through TikTok
Me too,
and
yeah.
some song will pop on, right? And it'll be like super heavy. And it's like, oh, if you like Killswitch Engage, you're gonna love this. Or if you like, and so all you hear is 3 seconds, 4 seconds of a song. And I'll go and I'll like, I like this, and I'll go right to Apple Music and I'll type in the band and the song title will pop up. And if I listen to the song, I download it and I put it in my playlist. So like now it's just super accessible, right? Where,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
But it's also, you know, the reason I brought that up a little bit was because you were saying that you looked up these bands first, and then it wasn't until you found Emperor and
sure.
Cradle of Filth that things sounded good. And well, you know, you explained it well, that it was like it actually sounded like they recorded it properly, and I can hear what they're doing. But it could as well also have been that you got used to the sound of black metal as you
Mm-hmm.
went through these different bands, and it's like,
Sure.
you know, so when your ears had, you know, you trained your ears to that kind of music, right? And it's
Right.
like, okay, now if you know, now I'm used to it, now I'm starting to
Yeah.
appreciate it. So
And so one of the bands that was like that, that was very, I did not like them at first, and now I really like them, was Necrophagia. And again, that was a Phil Anselmo thing, right? He wore a Necrophagia shirt, and I'm like, I don't get this. Like this guy Killjoy is making this out like the music doesn't sound very good. It's not really like responsive. And then I open up the CD cover, and it's like four porn stars. Like Jenna Jameson was like in the insert with like him there, and I was like, okay, so obviously there's some kind of like build up to this. But then when I heard the next Necrophagia album, I was like night and day different. I was like, this is awesome. And I became a huge Necrophagia fan just because of like, you know, the shock value of it and then the awesomeness of it. But then again, that was a Phil Anselmo, you know, of Pantera, wore a Necrophagia shirt. And I'm like, I don't know this band. And this is now the internet era. So it was easy to, you know, go to, you know, to a computer and type in Necrophagia, and everything would pop up.
right, yeah. Cool. Well, you know, I kind of feel like that almost leads into what could be the topic for next week a little bit. You know,
Yeah,
uh,
let's,
the discoverability and the sustainability
yeah,
of
I
of,
agree.
of stuff. I think that we're leading into that. So I'm just recognizing that my brain is starting to spin
Yeah.
here.
So
So
we'll all right. So we'll do this. We'll stop here. We'll table this till next week because obviously we always say we're going to go on for like 30 or 40 minutes, and we're always hour and a half or longer into it. So it's a good time frame for this. So that's awesome. But we'll do this. We'll deliver this message to you. We talked about it a little bit earlier, guys. The Podkvlt now is its own separate entity, right? We have a Facebook page now. We have an Instagram page. We're soon to have a YouTube and a TikTok page. So we're asking you guys on TikTok and Instagram, if you follow me, the One Fun Guy podcast, or you follow Kelly, who's Kelly Arsenic, if you like our stuff, guys, collectively, all we're asking is that you follow us on TikTok and friend request us on Facebook so we can get our numbers up so we can make it our own entity. That's the plan. We realize it's not going to be a quick process. It's going to take some time. There's going to be some buildup. There's going to be some basis and some fundamental stuff to what we're doing, but we want it to be successful and grow. And we can't do that without you guys. So if you're watching this live or you catch us on the replay, if you are a subscriber to the One Fun Guy podcast, please follow the Podkvlt. It's our special thing. It's not me and it's not just Kelly. It's the collective of us two. It's our project now. So it's completely independent. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. So please follow us on Instagram, friend request us on Facebook. We will expand this as much as we can. We're going to talk hard rock and heavy metal. We're going to talk about our lives. Everything you just saw for the last hour and 35 minutes is what we're going to discuss every week. And obviously, we have good conversation because time flies and we don't even realize that this time has passed. But if you guys can do us a solid and subscribe to our Facebook and friend request us there, and then follow us on Instagram, that will help. By next week, we will have our own independent YouTube and our own independent TikTok, and we will kind of correlate them all together as one. So obviously, we're going to feed off of our own personal pages. Like, we understand that. You know, Kelly has his own, stuff on social media. I have my own stuff on social media, and we're going to use that as a platform to bring eyes on the Podkvlt. But collectively, guys, this is us now. So it is official as of today. We have our own email, we have our own Facebook, and we have our own Instagram. So please follow us, like us, support us, share our stuff, do all the social media stuff, and we will not let you down with the Podkvlt. It's going to be awesome. This thing is going to steamroll. It's going to be here for a long, long time, and who knows where it'll end up. But I have a good feeling about this one. So I think collectively we are going to get this thing going, and we need your help and support to do that. So we're not begging you to do it, but if you could do us a solid and do all the social media stuff, the like, follow, shares, we would greatly appreciate it. So with that being said, this video will post next week when I have the YouTube set up. Everything that we do here is going to be on its own YouTube page. So you will see it live there posted, and then we will go live through the Podkvlt page on Facebook. We weren't able to do that tonight, but next week we'll be on point. So again, if you like what we're doing here, just give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a follow, and we will see you guys next Friday or Saturday, maybe both, who knows. We'll see what our schedules are like, but we'll bring some more metal your way. So have a good weekend, everybody, and we will talk to you soon. Callie, anything you want to say?
You said it all. It's great. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect. We'll see you guys next week.